Welcome back to the bigger picture discussion on Islamophobia in the United States. On our panel tonight is Corey Saylor, Legislative Director for the Council on American Islamic Relations, Rajdeep Singh, Director of Law and Policy at the American Sikh Coalition, and Dr. Michael Scheuer, Adjunct Professor at Georgetown University's Center for Peace and Security Studies and a former CIA analyst. And Corey, just before we went to the break, you were talking about the profile, the nature of the Islamic community in the United States. You want to just summarize that?
Sure. Essentially, when you remove the fear factor and look at the facts, the American Muslim community is well integrated and cooperating with law enforcement in many investigations against people who would commit violent acts against the United States.
In simple form.
In simple form.
You know, okay. Rajdeep, you were mentioning a survey, a 2006, did you say, survey of American attitudes towards Muslims.
We in the Sikh community actually are in solidarity with the Muslim community because we face many of the same issues, and we look to attitudes, popular attitudes about Muslims as kind of a bellwether to see whether our community is in danger. And in 2006, Gallup conducted some surveys, and one of the most frightening statistics that came out of those surveys was that about 40% of respondents would favor measures that would require American Muslims to carry special ID cards naming their religion. 40%. So it wasn't sort of a fringe minority of respondents in that survey who supported those kinds of measures. And that's very troubling to us in the post-9/11 environment, given that Sikhs often are targeted as a result of anti-Muslim bigotry.
Right. And Michael, you made the point that it's not that they hate our religions or our freedoms or whatever. People, Muslims outside the United States who are angry with us or even have attacked us. It's that they hate our foreign policy.
It's very much the case, Tom. You know, even the young American Muslims who go to fight overseas are not driven because they hate American culture or American society. They're driven to respond to our activities in Somalia, for example, in Iraq, as another example. We have never arrested anyone in this country from the Muslim community who was planning an attack on the United States who claimed to be attacking us because they hated women in the workplace or elections in Iowa. It always has to do with our support for Israel. These are very substantive things. But Barack Obama, Mr. Romney, Mr. Bush, Senator Kerry, Senator McCain have lied to the American people and convinced the American people that the Muslim community in the United States is hateful toward our culture. And there are certainly things that in our culture aren't going to work for Islam, the paganism of our entertainment system. It doesn't work for some Catholics. But the idea that Muslims are just crazy people and are going to blow things up because they don't like the fact that my daughter goes to university is nuts. But that's what you get from the presidents of both parties, from the Congress, from much of the media, and certainly from the Jewish American community that supports Israel.
And Mike makes a very important point there when he talks about the substance. You know, what are the deep things behind what's going on? Unfortunately, the conversation in the United States too often doesn't look at those things. It goes for caricatures. So right now we see rioting in Spain and Greece, and you don't see the pundits on TV going, these people are that's just how they are, they're savages. People say there are reasons behind this rioting, you know, the economic difficulties. But in all the situation that we saw recently in many Muslim countries, many people just brushed it off as, well, they saw a film, they got offended, and that was what was behind the riots. It may have been a spark, but there were certainly other more salient factors, like what Michael described, behind the continuation of the unrest in the Middle East.
Rajdeep, do you think that if we had taken the side of Taiwan in some sort of hostility with China in the recent past, and I mean arguably that's a possible scenario, and then it had turned into an issue of race and Confucianism or Buddhism or something like that, that we could, you know, that we could just substitute Asians for Muslims or Arabs or people of, you know, wearing turbans or who have darker skin, or fill in the blank.
Well, I hope not. I hope not. But
I mean, is that not the history of this? I mean, all the way back to the Roman Empire?
Well, even as we speak, I mean, this isn't Islamophobia, anti-Muslim bigotry doesn't sort of exist in a vacuum. We're living in an environment that's been tainted by xenophobia, anti-immigrant rhetoric, homophobic rhetoric, racist rhetoric. And I think that
got anti-Mexican, anti-Hispanic
name
rhetoric
your minority.
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of groups out there that can be scapegoated very easily, and unfortunately, Muslims are under the gun right now.
Yeah. I want to bring up a graphic here. This is the Islamophobia megaphone. How a tight network of anti-Muslim, anti-Islam foundations are spreading misinformation. They have these misinformation experts, and there's this list of a relatively small number of donors, and over the last 10 years, $42.6 million, relatively small amount of money. And then, you know, they funnel us through the experts who end up on the media talking about this stuff. Principally, the main, I suppose, mainstream media would be Fox News. And then that echo chamber then echoes into the religious right. And this is, Michael, you mentioned, you know, Jewish Americans who support Israel. I'd say Protestants as well.
Absolutely.
There's a huge, I mean, this is a major thing.
It's absolutely. It's two groups of Americans who put every country but theirs first.
Right. But here's the Islamophobia echo chamber, and you've got the religious right, Pat Robertson, John Hagee, Ralph Reed, Franklin Graham, et cetera. You've got the media, Fox News Channel at the top of that, and then the list goes on down through the right-wingers. The political players, a small handful of members of Congress, including King and West and Bachmann, Brown, and the grassroots organizations, some of which probably most people have never heard of, like the Tennessee Freedom Coalition, and then others, the American Family Association, that people are more familiar with. They amplify this into the public sphere. Corey, how do you deal with this? How do American Muslims deal with this? How do they respond to this?
It's not an American Muslim problem anymore. So David Yerushalmi, one of the people on that list, came up with a bill that essentially targets Islamic practices to be treated differently under the law than others. In the last 2 years, we've seen 78 anti-Islam bills introduced in 31 states in the U.S. Congress. 85% of those are the ones pushed by David Yerushalmi. Now, the reason that I say this is no longer just a Muslim problem, because this is clearly, on its face, a violation of the First Amendment, because you have the government targeting a particular faith for particular sanctions. So we're no longer in a discussion about, you know, forgive me for putting it this way, but mere discrimination. We are now talking about changing the conversation to undermining the Constitution because of the fear pushed by the people in this megaphone that you're talking about. So how do we deal with it? We fall back on the Bill of Rights, and we go to court and we push back in that fashion. And so far, we've been successful, but you cannot just have a conversation in courts. You have to have people of goodwill standing up and recognizing that what was done to the Japanese after World War II, putting them in internment camps, was wrong, and passing laws to target any religion in the United States is wrong. And just as we got rid of the camps for the Japanese, we have to get rid of laws and things like this.
Indeed. Rajib, one of the big talking points of this right-wing machine is Sharia law. And there are observant Jews who won't wear clothing made out of 2 different kinds of fabric because it's outlawed in Deuteronomy, who won't eat shellfish, who keep kosher. Sikhism, am I saying it correctly, has an association with turbans and beards. I mean, there are rules. Religions have rules. At what point, by singling out a particular one, in this case Sharia, which in most versions as played out in the United States and in most European countries is not jihad or craziness, it's simply rules for life. At what point does that become what Corey was talking about, the singling out of an individual religion, and thus dangerous to other religions like yours?
Well, the Sharia law debate, which is unfolding in several American courts, is a red herring. I mean, that's a straw man. We've got a supremacy clause in the Constitution which affirms that U.S. law is supreme. No other law can supersede American law. Right. And crackdowns on the right of Muslims to practice their religion affect Sikhs. They affect observant Jews. There have been measures in recent years in a couple states to prohibit people from wearing head coverings in driver's license photos. Mm-hmm. And although that's been targeted at Muslims by and large, Sikhs stand to lose, observant Jews and others stand to lose if those laws are upheld.
Right. So, Michael, you were there early on at the CIA as 9/11 was happening, and here we are now. What is the arc that you see unfolding? Where do you think this is going, and what should we be doing about it?
The arc that's unfolding is that the war is going to spread. If you took a map into the war against Islamic militancy is going to spread because there is an unendable reservoir of people who are willing to defend their faith against what they truly believe are the imperial activities of the United States and its allies. And the American people have not been acquainted with that because our presidents, Mr. Obama more than anyone, has lied about what people are motivated by when they're attacking us. Those people that killed our ambassador in Benghazi, they weren't attacking us because they hated freedom. They were attacking us because those people were symbols of the United States government, which is regarded in the Muslim world as an aggressive anti-Islamic force.
Or at least in that part of
in most of the Islamic world, Tom, if you look at the polls, 75 to 80% regard U.S. foreign policy as an attempt to destroy Islam or to harm Islam. There's a great difference in the Muslim world, although many of our politicians speak as if Muslims are too dumb to be able to draw the line between Americans as people and the U.S. government. When you travel in the Muslim world, an American person is generally treated with great cordiality, but the distaste and distrust for our government is very great. And I would say one thing for Corey, or suggest one thing. I think this is directly in the hands of the Muslim community. I thought it was a travesty when the leaders of the Muslim community did not go up to those hearings that Mr. King, or Congressman King had, and explain very clearly on television and to the media that the problem that the Muslim community has in how its youngsters are influenced is your foreign policy.
So we have just 20 seconds. Corey, your thoughts on this?
If you watch the first hearing that Peter King held the day before, we were on C-SPAN essentially doing many of the things that you're talking about, Mark, and then I know Peter King saw it because he attacked my organization throughout the first hearing. Right. So there was definitely a counterweight to what Mr. King was saying. Unfortunately, however, during a congressional hearing, he has the bullhorn, we don't.
Yeah, he definitely did. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us.
Thank you, sir.